You're listening to the NABS Now podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the NABS Now podcast. I'm your host for today, Isabel Rosario. Some of you might recognize me from past episodes as the co-host, but we're changing things up for this episode. Today, we'll be talking about all things graduate school and diving into the unique experiences and challenges faced by blind students pursuing higher education. To introduce our speakers, we have our co-host, Noah Carver, and I'll pass it along to you.
Thank you very much. So first of all, we have a fantastic panel here, and we're going to start with Justin Salisbury. Justin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're studying, and a little bit about yourself?
Certainly. I'm someone who's been a part of the National Federation of the Blind since 2008. I am 34 years old, and I am in a PhD program in rehabilitation counselor education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I have worked as a cane travel instructor and rehabilitation teacher. I'm a graduate of the master's program at Louisiana Tech University, which is run in conjunction with the National Federation of the Blind. And I've got work experience as a cane travel instructor and rehabilitation teacher, which I know I just said.
Awesome. What about you, Kira?
Hi, everyone. So I actually graduated from law school about 2 years ago in 2022. I graduated from Boston University School of Law, and I'm still living in Boston, and I'm working as a lawyer at a nonprofit that's focused on healthcare law. And like Justin, I've been a part of the NFB for a very long time. I'd say pretty much as long as I can remember. And my interests outside of school in my spare time are running, hiking, just being outside. And I also love reading, listening to music, just hanging out with friends and enjoying life.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kira. And that's Kira Sweeney. And certainly, last but not least, Rachel Grider.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Grider, and I am actually currently a graduate student at Louisiana Tech University, getting my master's in orientation and mobility and a certification in rehab teaching. Before I came here, I actually was teaching music. I actually have already gone to graduate school. I went to Peabody Conservatory and graduated in 2000 and have degrees in music and composition, but also music theory pedagogy. And I was teaching music. Then I decided that I wanted to do a bit of a career change. So I came here. So I've been a student here for about almost a year now. And I've also been a member of the NFB since 2011. I am currently serving on the board in the National Federation of the Blind of California.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Isabel for our first question.
Awesome. Thank you guys again. So our first question is, what is the one feature that distinguishes applying for a grad program versus the undergraduate experience? And Kira, how about you go first?
Sure. So I'd say the distinguishing feature is that for graduate school applications, you need to have a clear idea of your goals than you did for undergraduate applications. In your undergrad applications, you could highlight what you did in the past and explore a little bit of what you might want to do in the future, but you really didn't need to have any sort of commitment. Where for grad school applications, you do need to have that a little bit more. You're expected to know generally what direction you are headed in. Doesn't need to be all ironed out with all the details, but general roadmap is helpful. And that being said, it's always okay to change your mind. In most cases, you're not completely locked into what you've said in your application. Not anything to feel pressured, like, oh, I need to know exactly what I'm going to be doing and stick to it. But you do need to have some idea and be able to imagine, like, what do I think I might be doing in 5 years? And if you're not able to do that very clearly, I think it's a good idea to gain some more work experience, life experience, and think a little bit more about what you want to do before applying to grad school.
Awesome. Anybody else have anything to add?
Just to add to that, I like everything that I heard from Kira, but I want to say that these graduate programs are really ready to prepare you for a given profession. And when you're an undergraduate, there's still a lot of exploration of yourself, but at the graduate level, they're looking for somebody where they can see you as that rising professional. And as a blind person, sometimes there's a little bit extra that we have to do to help people to think of us as that rising professional.
Can you expound on that? So, like, what are some things that you would point out as things that people should be aware of?
When you are marketing yourself to a graduate program, you need them to be able to see you as the rising professional who shows up on the other side. So when I was going for my first master's program at Louisiana Tech, I had to be talking to people like Dr. Edward Bell, who runs that program, and talking to him in a way that he could be able to see me as someone who could one day be an actual cane travel instructor. When I was applying to PhD programs the first time around, and I started at another school, mastered out of it. I was in a PhD program in educational leadership and policy studies. And when I was applying, I had to be convincing them that I was the kind of person who could join the academy and actually be that person with a PhD doing research on education, leadership, and policy, and being one of their colleagues. And so they were not only admitting me to a program, but they were admitting me to a network as part of their profession. I had to be able to demonstrate competencies in a way that they could recognize and relate to. That's not necessarily the same in-depth kind of vetting that you get as an undergraduate.
Gotcha.
I just want to add one thing. Everything that has been said has been wonderful. Going back to Kira's point about knowing your goals, I like to add that also when you're researching grad schools, look at the teacher that you want to study under or the teachers you want to study under, as well as the school itself. It's really important, especially, well, like when I went to Peabody for music, it was really important that I was aware of the person I was going to study with, not just the school. And so I think, having people that you know who are doing similar things to what you are planning to do is helpful. So reading bios, reaching out, trying to, as you're applying, really having that idea of what you can see yourself doing and looking for those mentors, I think is really a game changer if you can find that as you're going to grad school.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, well, I think let's move on to the next question then, and this sort of ties in sort of to what Justin was talking about. What is the process like for requesting accommodations in a grad program, and what, if any, differences are there between undergraduate and graduate disability services? Let's start with you, Rachel, for this one.
So from my experiences, I really didn't find a lot of difference. I felt like I definitely had to advocate for myself more in grad school. At least, again, this is my personal experience, because sort of like what Justin was saying, I felt like I really needed to be on it and be thinking about not just what I needed for my classes, but also what I would need for my profession, kind of looking forward, making sure that I would be successful. The disability services that I had at Peabody was slightly different. It wasn't actually called the Disability Services Office. It was Dean of Student Affairs. So it was just the Student Affairs Office, but it really kind of worked the same way. I just felt more of a responsibility to be getting a lot of the things or taking more control of what I got and when I got it, rather than really relying on that office. That was personally how I wanted to do it, because I wanted to model it more after what it would be like in the real world after grad school.
Cool. What about you, Kira?
I had very contrasting experiences between undergrad and grad school in terms of requesting accommodations. So I went to a pretty small undergrad for college, and I was working with the student affairs office and mainly just working with one person. And the process there was pretty flexible. I could determine a lot about the accommodations that I had and what was put in place. And the process wasn't as solidified. Now, for my grad school program. So even though I went to a law school, I was working with the disability services program for the entire university. So that was very different because Boston University has a very organized setup for how they handle accommodations. They have protocol and procedures. I realized for the first time that I needed to renew my accommodations each semester. It wasn't like the dean of student affairs just knew me and knew that I was going to have the same accommodations each semester. I actually needed to fill out a form and renew those accommodations. That's just one example of how things changed. And also, it was a little bit easier and more efficient to deal with a process that was already in place, and just knowing what to expect was great. But the downside of that was there were some stricter deadlines, and if you didn't submit your textbook by a certain time, you just weren't going to get it because the deadline had already passed. So there were pros and cons to each system, but I'd say overall, I would prefer dealing with the bigger university setup and having a process in place so that we weren't trying to invent the wheel.
Gotcha.
Right. So for me, I feel like at the graduate level applying for accommodations, I know my own needs so much better than I did when I was an undergraduate, because that transition from high school to college when I was 18, 19 years old, that time I didn't know my own needs that well because I didn't really understand the college landscape nearly as well. Going into it as a grad student, totally different because I'm much more familiar with that landscape. And there's also at the graduate level, I find that there are a lot of specialized kinds of materials that may be less common for the disability services offices to have to convert for me. So I can still work with them on that, but that is a factor to consider. And that involves me educating them about those kinds of materials that I'm bringing in. Like if I'm bringing in state legislative policy documents or something else that's just not as common for them, I'm teaching them a little bit about what these things are and why we use them. Also, teaching assistant duties, because I've worked as a teaching assistant, those are handled differently. So it's still kind of a graduate school accommodation because I have to do the teaching assistantship to pay for my education, but those are handled as employee accommodations, at least at the school where I'm doing it. So the teaching assistant process is different in the sense that the same people who know how to do my accommodations for class, who could very easily give me exactly what I need because they already know me and they know how to work with me, but that falls outside their jurisdiction, and I may be working with an entirely different crew of people for those teaching assistant accommodations. And I might be starting over at square one. It might be even harder with them.
I'll move on to the next question. What have your personal experiences been with job recruitment, internship searches, and networking through your grad program? Also, did you find the process to be open to blind students? How about we start with Justin?
I think this has varied by which graduate program. When I was at Louisiana Tech, I think these things went really well, and lots of people in the blindness field, those who are open to the kind of services that we teach people to provide in that program, they are so ready to meet all of those Louisiana Tech graduate students, and they are so quick to try to recruit us to come work for them here, or here. You really get a lot of opportunities that way. The network is well established. The pathway to building all those connections is just so clear. I've also been in other spaces where that hasn't gone so well. I've been in other spaces where we who are blind are perceived as a threat, because if people are trying to build their whole professional image in a way that is predicated upon low expectations for people with disabilities, then a competent blind person who knows what's going on and maybe even contests some of the things that they might say is very threatening, and then can get shut out from a lot of spaces. So I might have times where I think I'm asking an easy question, really lobbing a softball to somebody who's up at the microphone and thinking that I'm going to help them look good, but in fact, they don't actually know that really easy question's answer, or it's not easy for them. I find that there's a lot of people who will talk all day about disability inclusion, and it's easy to talk in the abstract or to talk and preach to everybody else, but then when it's time for you to put on those big boy pants and do it yourself, it's a lot harder for some people. So I think I've had a mixed bag of experiences, some very good and some it's been really challenging.
How about you? Rachel?
I would agree with Justin. It's interesting because right now at Louisiana Tech University, we haven't quite gotten to job recruitment yet because I still have 2 more quarters to go. But from what I hear, it's going to be pretty easy. Supposedly, it won't be, very difficult to find a job as a blind person because they are literally looking for people from this program to work in so many different O&M jobs around the country. But my experience at Peabody, it was not great in that respect, I won't lie. There had been a student before me at school who was blind. I'm not sure how much before me, but I guess there had been some differences in how that person did things and how I did things. And I think that sometimes created a problem. And so sometimes I felt like there were some opportunities that I had to kind of fight for. One opportunity when I was applying for the music theory program at Peabody, because I wanted to add a music theory pedagogy onto my degree, and that required an internship as part of that degree. And they were very unwilling to allow me into that program because they didn't understand how a blind person could teach. They couldn't understand how a blind person could teach in general, let alone something quote unquote visual like music theory. So I had to prove to them, basically sort of along the lines of what Justin was saying earlier. I felt like I definitely had to do more to get into that program than any of the other sighted students would have had to do, because I had to do not only one interview, but I had to do 2 interviews, and I had to prove to them and demonstrate to them that I could teach. I had to do some things that were more challenging, I think, than some of the other students had to do, just to show that I could do it. And that was definitely a challenge. So the expectations were not high. And I felt like the entire time I was at Peabody, it was kind of an uphill battle of trying to fight some of those low expectations.
Oh, that's really unfortunate, but good for you for being able to stand up for yourself and get things done. What was your experience like, Kira?
So I had a really great experience with recruiting, participating in internships. I was pleasantly surprised because that was one of the things I was most uncertain about going into grad school. And I think part of that was just the law school I attended was really good about helping people find opportunities and setting up structured programs to find internships. Another part of it was that I had gotten advice very early on to work closely with the career development office and work with my career advisor. That ended up being a really good relationship. That person was extremely helpful to me in identifying opportunities and helping me to network. So I would recommend doing that, meeting with career services, even when it might seem like other students aren't doing it as much. I think, as Rachel said, sometimes we need to do a little bit more than others, and that is sort of unfortunate, but also it can lead to more opportunities, more growth down the road. So there are advantages to it too. Something else that was really good about my grad school experience was learning how to network. I don't know if this is the same for all graduate programs, but law school, there are a lot of networking events that you go to. I remember going to my first one and being just really intimidated because it was a big event, and I walked in and I just heard this wall of sound and I wasn't sure exactly where to go or who to talk to. That first one was not a great experience, so I started thinking about strategies to handle these events a little bit better, and I decided to pair up with a friend and go through these events together. I think that was great for both myself and for my friend. Eventually, I got really comfortable with the way that networking events were set up, so I was able to navigate those effectively on my own. But I think for the first couple times, if you're feeling a little uncertain, it can benefit you and someone else to say, hey, let's go do this together and walk through the tables together. I was really lucky with my experience and with the school that I went to, and I chose internships that kind of naturally led into other internships. So that was great.
Awesome. I kind of wanted to circle back to when you talked about networking. Aside from bringing a friend, I'm curious what other strategies you employed to make yourself more comfortable in those situations.
So, some other strategies I used were just thinking about it from a different perspective, like thinking of how I would feel if someone came up to my table and asked, "Oh, who's here? Like, what's going on here?" I think it's so easy to get in our heads and think that everyone's judging us, but if we think about it from being on the other side and how we would feel if someone asked us at a networking event, like, "Hey, what's this organization about?" We would be excited, we'd be happy. And now I am on the other side of that. And I've participated in networking events as a representative from an organization. And I love when people come up to me and ask me what's going on. So it's really nothing to feel shy or nervous about. And it's good to ask for people's names. I mean, even though it might be a little awkward because most people will know the names, even though you're wearing name tags. Like it really helps you to learn names better than most people would, because I think sometimes glancing at a name tag, some people might forget. I try to remember one detail about each person that I meet, just so that I can remember them and have something to talk about the next time that I am in touch with them.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll pass it on to Noah for the next question.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So here's a question for folks considering grad school. What are some pros and cons of attending a grad program versus seeking full-time employment right out of undergrad study? I understand that depends on the degree that folks are going into, but still love to have you guys' input on this one. So let's start with Justin.
After my undergraduate experience, I made a choice that wasn't going to graduate school or going to work, but it was close. I chose to go to the Louisiana Center for the Blind for a gap year for a 9-month program. I took it like a school year, September to June. That was something that was really key for me. And that is an option. I know it wasn't named, but that was key to everything else that I did afterward. I think one of the advantages to going straight into grad school, though, is that you have fresh academic skills and you have familiarity with current programs, things like course management systems that people are going to be using in the academy shortly after. But the advantage to going to work is that you're learning about the world outside of academia, which is really important. You're grounding yourself and proving yourself in those professional spaces, and it helps to clarify your goals, and you learn a lot about yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What about you, Kira?
I would have to second everything that Justin said. So I also took a gap year going to training. I went to the Colorado Center for the Blind. After that, I worked for a couple of years. I certainly agree with what Justin said about it helping you to find yourself and find some direction. It was a great experience. I feel like I'm a little bit biased on this question because I always recommend that people take a little bit of time off between undergrad and grad school. I think it's really important to get out in the world, especially if you're not 100% clear on what you want to do next. If you're very solid and confident on what you want to do and you just want to get done with school faster, then yeah, go straight through. But if you're not really sure and you want to explore some options and get some time out in the working world, then I think taking that time is a really good idea. I took, let's see, about 3 years, and I think that was the perfect amount of time for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And what about Rachel?
I guess my experience is a little different. I went straight to grad school after undergrad. I would second everything that Justin said. You have that momentum going forward. It's really a great thing to do that. However, I think I was more concerned about getting done faster than about actually having set goals at that time. So I definitely will also second what Kira said about it is a good idea to have some life experience and to set some goals. And it's interesting. I had a great experience in grad school. Overall, once I got out, I started working as a music teacher. But it's interesting because coming back to grad school now, after having been teaching for a while, it's a very different experience. Having that life experience, it's a different vibe. I feel like I have more together now than I did. I feel like I have more of an idea of what I actually really want to do with my life. I feel like I have a better balance, and I feel like I'm actually more focused now for some reason, which is interesting. So I don't know if that's age or experience, or if that has to, I think a lot of it does have to do with the life experience I had.
Hey, maybe a combination of both.
Probably a combination of both. Because when I went to grad school before, I had never not been in school before. I had been in school from the time I had been like 3 years old until I was 24, basically, when I graduated from Peabody. So I had not had really any real life experience up until I was done with grad school. So I think there are definitely advantages to doing that, but there are also really good advantages for going to work.
Awesome. I'm hearing a real common theme out of all of this, and y'all can agree or disagree with this, and feel free to correct me. But what I'm hearing is it's really important to set your goals before you enter grad school. In other words, have a clear picture of what you want to do, and therefore let that decide what you end up doing once you exit your undergrad program. Is that accurate?
That sounds good to me.
Same. Sounds great.
Awesome. All right, Isabel, you're up next.
Well, we all hear about how rigorous and demanding graduate schools can be. So how have you all navigated that, including research, discussions, and presentations? And we can start with Kira.
The way I handled the demands of grad school was treating it like work and having kind of a 9 to 6 schedule like I did in my job. So I think that's also another advantage to gaining work experience, is getting practice with establishing that kind of schedule for myself, because I can tell you I did not have that in undergrad. I was up at all hours of the night, procrastinating, doing things at the very last minute. So I was a lot more structured with my time.
As an undergrad, I am currently there, and I'm currently doing that. Maybe I shouldn't admit to doing that, but oh well.
You know what? We got to be honest here. This is a judgment-free zone.
Right. Anyway, sorry.
And I did the same thing, and yeah, I think that working for a couple of years was really how I got out of that habit, because at work you have deadlines, and if you don't meet them, you're going to be in trouble. You might not keep your job. So that is how I got used to being on deadlines, meeting deadlines, and sticking to a schedule. I also took either a full day or a half day off every week. It was usually Saturday. So I found that once I was sticking to my 9 to 6 schedule, that I could take Saturdays off pretty easily. Maybe not during finals week, but most other weeks. That was really important for me to do to maintain a sense of balance. In terms of research and presentations, the way that I handled that was connecting with professors. That's something that didn't always come easily to me. I don't think I met with a single professor during undergrad, like outside of class time, but in law school, I made a point to connect with professors and build relationships and go to office hours and ask the questions that I needed to ask. And that was really helpful. Like, I think sometimes in school, we're not sure what to do, and we sit there just spinning our wheels for a while, and that can lead to a lot of procrastination and just feeling stuck on things, when really if you just reach out and ask for some help, that can lead you in the right direction and help to get you going. Things get done a lot more easily. That was a lesson that I learned.
Awesome, thank you. How about Rachel?
So I second everything that Kira said. I try to take one day off a week. Usually that is Sundays for me. I try to make sure that I allow time each day to do things that are not school related. Right now, I can't do a 9 to 6 thing, unfortunately, because I have classes during the day a lot of times, but I do try to use time when I'm not in classes to like sneak in some reading or some, work on a paper or whatever. But I will say, I think balance is really, 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 really important. My first quarter here on the quarter system at Louisiana Tech, so everything's a little bit faster. You have 10 weeks instead of 16-week semester to get everything done. And so my first quarter here, I had immersion for 8 hours a day, plus I had classes at night. And so it was exhausting. I didn't really have any time to myself at all, because I think a lot of it had to do with, I was still trying to get into the momentum. I literally moved here and then started school right away. And I was kind of miserable. In the end, I did fine and everything, and it all went okay. Looking back, I realized that because I didn't allow time for myself, and I didn't really have a very good balance in my time, that really messed with my mental health. So I think making sure that you have that balance and give yourself some time off. Set a schedule if it helps, doing 9 to 6 thing if that works, or 8 to 5 or whatever, or giving yourself at least a day off if you can during the week to do other things is really, really, really important.
Thank you. How about you, Justin? Do you have anything else to add?
Certainly. When I was an undergrad, I chose to live in the dorms and eat in the dining halls because that was really the only way that I knew how to survive. I did not know how to take care of myself, and I did not know how to live on my own. I did a math degree for my undergrad because I couldn't handle things that involved a lot of reading. A lot of people say, oh, well, math is just so hard. It's amazing. You're so smart. You could do it. Well, for me, that was basically one of very few things that I could do because I could not keep up with the reading in the courses that had a lot of reading in them. And everyone reads math slowly, so I could keep up. But then I am so glad that I chose to go to training at the Louisiana Center for the Blind, because that helped me not only to live on my own, but it also gave me so many more options because I became so much more efficient at reading and doing lots of other things. I developed an emotional adjustment to blindness that I think is really powerful. It was a real game changer for me. I use Braille notes when I'm giving presentations. Even if you have a big PowerPoint presentation and most of the content is on the slides, you could still use Braille notes on index cards, one index card per slide, or whatever formula you want to put for yourself. But having those Braille notes really makes a difference when giving a presentation. I also get complimented on my eye contact quite a bit because I don't have to look down at whatever I'm reading. People think I have it memorized, except no, I don't. I'm reading it in Braille. I also have implemented the turn-taking protocols that we do in the blind community. I've asked for those in my classes where we say our name to be recognized by the person sharing the meeting. And that works really well in classrooms because then we all learn each other's names pretty quickly when we otherwise might not. So now in graduate school, because of the training and skill boost that I got from the Louisiana Center for the Blind, I am now able to actually read everything, and it is a lot. I mean, even if I had an undergraduate program that was full of reading, this grad school PhD work, it is a lot of reading. And because of what I got from training, I am able to handle all this reading with Braille on a refreshable Braille display and also with JAWS. I'm really glad that I'm here.
All right. Here's another question for y'all. Have you found it difficult to access and utilize research materials, textbooks, and academic resources in graduate school, especially in fields that heavily rely on visual information? And what resources have been most accessible in these situations?
All right. So in this program, I haven't really had any issues yet with that, though I actually have a project coming up which may present a problem, but I haven't gotten there yet. So we'll find out. But
perhaps some foreshadowing here.
Possibly, yes. But I'm not sure. We'll see. But so far, this program has been pretty okay. But at Peabody, I definitely had to use a reader. And I feel like there's a question about this later, so I won't get too much into it. I think there's a question about this. I'll just say that the reader was very helpful because there were times in my program I had to look through musical scores and I had to use those for projects or for research. And so having a reader was pretty much the only really efficient way to do it because they could read it. We could go through lots of different scores together and they could read the pertinent information that I needed off of those scores, and I could decide if I wanted to use them or not. Also, some of the materials I had to access were very old articles and things that were not electronic. So that was another really good thing the reader helped with.
Awesome. How about you, Kira?
I also didn't encounter many accessibility issues in graduate school. One issue I did find was that one of the legal search engines was not super accessible with JAWS when I was in grad school, though I think it's gotten quite a lot better since then. And there was another search engine that was more accessible, but for my legal research class, we were supposed to learn how to use both. So that presented somewhat of a challenge. Sometimes I could find workarounds to be able to use the less accessible search engine, but sometimes I couldn't. And so I would need to use a reader, which often ended up being another classmate, which was also a way that I made friends with some of my classmates. Sometimes I was able to just ask to do extra searches with the search engine that did work and was more accessible. So it all kind of depended on the situation, and I had a good relationship with that professor so we could work around it and navigate that issue. Another accessibility challenge for law school was something called the Blue Book, which is the legal system of citation, citing cases. That involves a lot of formatting and having very specific fonts and bold and underline requirements. So that can be a bit tricky with JAWS. And also there are very specific formatting requirements for legal memos and legal briefs. My best advice for dealing with something like that is finding a classmate or professor or mentor who will be completely honest with you when you're learning how to format these things, because you will eventually learn how to do it, but it does take a lot of practice, and it does take someone telling you when something is a little bit off so that you can know, like, oh, okay, I need to do this differently this time. I need to remember not to press the return key twice because that messes up the formatting in some way when you're double spacing, things like that. But you don't really know these things until someone points it out to you. But then once someone does, you can practice and get better for next time. So yeah, learning formatting was something that I worked on a lot, especially during my first year of law school when I took a legal writing class. My professor always said, your writing is amazing, but your formatting needs some work. And so I committed to working on that because I had never wanted somebody to read a memo or a brief that I submitted and say, oh, well, this isn't professional and I wonder what's going on here. Like we've talked about before, we always have to prove ourselves a bit more as blind people. And so having a sloppily formatted paper or memo just wouldn't really reflect well and wasn't the image that I wanted to have come across. So I wanted to work on that and get better at that. And I did. And now I've had supervisors tell me that my formatting is really great and better than some of their cited colleagues. I mean, sometimes there are things that I miss. Sometimes something ends up in a blue font somehow, and I always have a proofreader. But yeah, that's a challenge that I worked through.
Thank you so much. And what about you, Justin? Anything you'd like to add here?
Sure. For me, as a researcher, I'm not necessarily going into the same like legal systems that Kira's going into, but I'm often needing to learn how to use statistical software packages, and sometimes there are also qualitative, like interview transcript type data editing softwares where a lot of times there's a lot of like visual things that people want to see. It moves things around, it puts them in colors and all kinds of graphics. I can't really see them. It doesn't really do me any good. And really, to a blind person, it's not that useful. But sighted people like it. And so they want to see that you're doing it. When it comes to those kinds of things, I have basically had to often try finding other things that I can use, which are often understood to be valuable, but it takes some negotiation and some explaining about how certain things that they like and that they think are cute are just not very accessible to us. There's a statistical software package that's really common in education and social sciences called SPSS, which I believe literally stands for Statistical Package for the Social Sciences. And on a Windows machine with JAWS, there are massive issues with accessibility. In the NFB, we had a resolution about it at National Convention years ago. We've been working on it, I think. I don't know where the status of that is, but still SPSS just won't work with JAWS. But if you are a Mac user, you can just basically turn it on and using a Mac, it will work with your screen reader. So that is one option. Learn how to use a Mac. Also, learning how to use statistical packages that work from the command line, like R or SAS, can also be very helpful. We've talked a little bit about Louisiana Tech, and I can tell you that my professor and program director, Dr. Bell, he didn't ditch me when I finished this program. Years later, when I was in a PhD program and I needed help figuring out statistics, he was able to spend some time with me and give me a tutorial on how to set up using SAS, which is a statistical software that he uses, in order to program from the command line. And so then I was able to get started that way. Graphic design is a big deal when you get to be doing these research presentations. People like to see concept maps and flowcharts, and I think they're really cool too, but the ways of making them are really not accessible. So I really want these. I like them. I think they're awesome. But the way to get a digital version of some of these that's really clean that you can put on a presentation slide or a poster or in a research article, man, that's tough if you're trying to do it as a blind person. I haven't found a good way to do it. One really popular software for that is Canva. And I am kind of now looking to see if I can hire somebody to build my graphics that way. But then there are also these principles about academic integrity where people say it needs to be all entirely your own work. And so there's a series of conflicts there that I'm still trying to resolve. But I think there are a lot of times there are options that work for us, and it may not be what people are expecting. But if we can find a way to convince them to let us do it that way, then we can get our work done. I think we have work to do as a blind movement to make all of these softwares more accessible.
Thank you so much. I'm not a grad student, but as a musician, I have to do a lot of typesetting and things like this. It's sort of different field, same problems. And so, honestly, this is really useful for me, too. All right, Isabel, got any other questions?
Yeah. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this question, which is, in what ways can universities better support blind students in pursuing advanced degrees, both academically and in terms of campus accessibility and inclusion?
One thing that I think is really important is that as we have all this blossoming of diversity, equity, and inclusion training, it's really important that we include disability in that umbrella. We need to be talking about ableism in those spaces, including epistemic ableism or epistemological ableism, basically where it's ableism in ways of knowing. A lot of times there are ways that we are trying to generate knowledge, especially if we're doing it in conjunction with the National Federation of the Blind, that falls outside the typical ways of constructing knowledge in academia. And so people don't want that a lot of times, but we need that. We as blind people need that. And so for the DEI training, or if there's a new generation and it's not called DEI anymore in 5 years, whatever it's called, include disability in that space. Also, I would say follow the ADA even when you are not required to do it. As in, when you have a building that's grandfathered in because it's older than the ADA, and maybe the signage in that building isn't required to be accessible to blind people. Well, just because you're not required to do it doesn't mean you can't do it anyway. You know how to do it. It doesn't only help us, it helps lots of people. And so when we're there as the instructor and we're having a hard time finding the room because there's no signage, because it's 10 feet up at the top of the door frames and we can't read the signs for the doors for the rooms, it kind of disrupts the relationship that we have there with the students. It doesn't mean we can't problem solve our way around it, but go ahead and give us some ADA signage. Follow the ADA even when you don't have to. It's absolutely shameful when you have students in a PhD program in special education or rehabilitation counseling, and the classroom that you're using for all of those classes is not ADA accessible, doesn't have accessible signage. How do you do that? How do you claim to be training special education professionals and rehab counselors if you're not giving accessibility in the classroom where you train people? I also believe that we should be finding ways to make JAWS available on any computer at that university that we may need to use, and hire accessibility consultants and to basically vet the software programs prior to purchasing the contracts and the other products and building curriculum, because a lot of times the die is cast. The curriculum's been written, the software contracts have been made, everything's purchased, and then they find out there's an accessibility issue. And that also includes things like program projector software. Man, is that a pain in the butt for me. But if these things had been intentionally vetted for accessibility ahead of time, then those things would be there and it would send a message to me and to everybody else that I belong in that space and that my inclusion was intentional.
Thank you for that. How about you, Kira?
Well, Justin pretty much said everything that I was going to say on this point, so I don't have a lot to add, but I would really emphasize what Justin said about including disability in DEI conversations. I think this plays out a lot in orientation in grad school. Like your first few days, there are sometimes a lot of conversations about different identity categories. And personally, I found that disability was completely ignored in these conversations, or I would be one of the only ones to bring it up, and the subject would get changed very quickly because people were uncomfortable. I think emphasizing disability in these conversations and highlighting that disability is a category of identity and it's not something to feel uncomfortable about or ashamed about or to be stigmatized. It's something that to be talked about out in the open, because I've had so many friends who've struggled in grad school because they felt that they couldn't be open about their disabilities. I think career services offices at grad schools can do a better job with talking about disability too, and talking about seeking accommodations in the workplace, because after you leave school, it can be unclear how to get accommodations in employment. So building that bridge would be helpful.
I will echo exactly what Justin and Kira both said. When I first went to Peabody, the very first, I think it was the first day, or it might have actually been orientation, I was told by somebody in the student affairs office, or that I was considering teaching music. I was told that I couldn't do it by someone who just offhandedly, how can a blind person do that? And I feel like that was really telling of that school's sort of knowledge and stance on disability, that somebody would say that in this, student affairs, somebody who was supposed to be essentially dealing with accommodations for people with disabilities. I absolutely agree. I think more awareness, more knowledge in adding to the bringing people with disabilities to the table, consult on a DEI committee. I would say not just one disability, but representatives of lots of different disabilities, because there are different needs. Different disabilities have different needs. So having those people to consult, more accessibility standards, and making sure that when a teacher is selecting a textbook, an interactive textbook, or a program, because right now it's all about these remote softwares that we're using to access textbooks and to take tests, and making sure that before that is made a part of a class or a curriculum, that it is tested for accessibility. Even in this program, which is a very quote unquote blind friendly program, because there are a lot of blind people that go through this program, I've still encountered a few issues and dealing with some minor inaccessibility, but we shouldn't have to deal with any inaccessibility. So yeah, I think just really making sure that accessibility standards are met in all places.
Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts on that. It was very impactful, everything you said, and hopefully we see these changes soon. Now to move on to our advice in 60 seconds. Noah, take it away.
Thank you so much. So this is advice in 60 seconds, and how this is going to work is I'm going to ask a question, and y'all have 60 seconds to answer it individually. I will let you know when you're getting close and when you're out of time. So with that out of the way, let's have the question, shall we? Yes. What advice would you give to prospective students considering pursuing advanced degrees? And what tips do you have for overcoming obstacles and succeeding in academia as a blind individual. So I have the stopwatch here, the stopwatch of doom. And let's start it off with Justin. You're up and go.
One of the most important things that you can do to set yourself up for success in graduate school is to make sure that you have up-to-date and excellent skills and confidence. The kind of adjustment that people make by going to one of the NFB's training centers is absolutely irreplaceable in trying to succeed in graduate school. So I absolutely, if people have not been through training, I absolutely encourage them to go to training before they go to graduate school. Also, have a network of blind people, especially a local chapter of the NFB, but a local network of blind people who can help you to talk through situations, problems, give you that outside perspective, but still
45.
Understanding blindness. And blind people who are doing what you want to do, so that you're on a similar journey and that you relate to similar situations. If you basically keep these things close to you, it will help you to get through everything else.
Time. That was right exactly 60 seconds. Whoa, that's... I'm not sure if that's a podcast first. We'll probably have to go back in the archives to look, but that was very impressive. Thank you so much. All right, resetting the stopwatch of doom. And Kira, you're up. Ready and go.
So my advice is to pursue your goals and don't let blindness be a barrier to your goals. It's okay to feel uncertain. It's okay to not know exactly how you're going to achieve what you want to achieve. But you have a whole network of blind people through the NFB and through NABS that can help you. And there will be someone in that network probably who's doing exactly the thing it is that you want to do. So reach out to other blind people, especially in your field. Ask for advice. I have a whole contingent of blind lawyers that I reach out to on a regular
10.
basis to ask for advice. Do what it is that lights you up and gives you
Time.
purpose in life.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, Rachel, you're up. You're the last. You are the last person standing.
Oh,
How you
boy.
feeling?
Oh, I'm scared.
Okay.
No, I'm good. I'm really good.
All right. All right, cool.
Ready?
All right, you ready?
Yes.
Ready, set, go.
All right. Very similar to what has already been said. Make sure that your blindness skills are there. If you need to go to training, go to training. If there's anything that you're feeling that maybe needs more work, mobility, braille, your technology, living skills, anything that you are not quite so confident about, go get that training before grad school. It will help. And get that confidence, because it's so important that you present yourself with confidence. Build your network, not just of blind people, but also of other people who are doing what you want to do. And the bigger your network, the better, right? You can never have too many people in your network. So have people you can reach out to, have blind people that you can reach out to who
10.
are going to be doing the same thing that you're doing. And then have your goals in mind. Think of where you want to see yourself as a career and pursue that goal.
Time. Excellent. You guys are really good at this. Are you guys like over here counting in the back of your heads as you do this? I know I would fail this if I had to do this. I would fail this if I had to do this. I'd just be like, tick tock.
You see,
No.
being in graduate school, we have to give lots of presentations, and at least in my case, they are timed. So it's a trick.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, thank you again to our speakers for joining us, sharing your insight and expertise. We hope that the experience shared and the advice given will inspire and guide others in pursuing their advanced degrees with confidence and determination. Stay tuned for more engaging discussions on our podcast.
Thank you very much.
This episode was hosted by Nora Carver and
Co-hosted by Isabel Rosario.
Sound edited and mixed by Seyoon Choi.
This podcast was brought to you by the National Association of Blind Students, a proud division of the National Federation of the Blind.
Find us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Mastodon, and TikTok as NABS Link or National Association of Blind Students, or on our website, nabslink.org. Be sure to subscribe or follow our podcast for new episodes and more releasing each month. Thanks for listening.